want to kick off quickly with an introduction. Excuse me. So my name is Jacob Smith. I'm seeing some familiar names and faces in the room here. But for those that don't know me, I work for an awesome company called Altimetrik, along with my colleague, Ryan Robinson, not to be confused with Ryan Landau, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Just quickly about me. So I work for Altimetrik. I run the Collider Detroit project, which I'll explain in just a second. And I come from a startup background, and notably, specifically, Altimetrik is my 6th company that I've worked for. So Ryan Landau is the expert in finding jobs, who we're going to be chatting with in just a moment. I'll be interviewing him, and we'll be opening it up to Q&A. But I share that detail just to say that I do have quite a bit of experience looking for jobs in the Detroit area. So this is not my kind of realm of expertise, but it is something that, I bring that perspective to the table. So I'm excited to hopefully be able to chime in with some insight as well to supplement Ryan's key insights here. So I mentioned that I work for a company called Altimetrik. Altimetrik is a global software services firm that specializes in what's called digital transformation. Company's actually headquartered in Southfield, Michigan, with a global presence, work with clients all over the world. We have offices predominantly in the US, but also in India and Uruguay. And what we do is digital transformation, which is essentially helping big companies stay ahead of the curve with the fast-paced, ever-changing world of technology. That's kind of in a nutshell. If you have any questions coming out of this conversation, want to learn more about what we do, I'm happy to have that conversation and tell you a bit more. I mentioned that myself and Ryan Robinson run a project called Collider out of Detroit. We are essentially, it's the community-facing branch of Altimetrik, the larger company, and it's an initiative that's that looks to create a community hub for local tech professionals, broadly speaking. We have a pretty heavy focus on software and technical professionals, but also kind of more broadly speaking, serving the technology community, looking to build things up, connect people, help people grow and learn and find jobs and all that good stuff. So that's the context of today's conversation. We're approaching this from the perspective of we want to help as many people as possible land awesome jobs in Detroit. Technology, broadly speaking, is a fast-growing sector, and something that Ryan Landau here has unique expertise in speaking to. And so hopefully we can cater the conversation towards what all this awesome information that you guys are sharing in the chat here today. So with that all said, as we kick off the conversation again, kind of the general framework here is going to be me posing questions for Ryan and kind of having just an informal back and forth conversation. As such, we set up this conversation so that everybody is in this chat room here. So please feel free as we go to post questions. I find that the easiest way, just to fit things into the stream of the conversation, is to post questions in the chat and then have those kind of incorporated into the conversation. But should the conversation wrap up early, we can also just open it up to general conversation as well. We're going to feel it out and just kind of see how it goes. How does that sound, Ryan Landau?
That sounds perfect. And I'm very excited. And Ryan, I know I haven't seen you in a while, but love the new glasses. You look beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
The Collider team really specializes in stylish glasses. That's really our core strength, in addition to connecting technology community.
God bless you.
Cool. So Ryan, I'm just kind of glancing through the comments here, and it looks like there's kind of a range, but a lot of folks that are kind of broadly speaking in a job search, looking for technology jobs in a variety of different contexts here, which is great. Yep. Cool. So Ryan, I was hoping that kind of first and foremost, we could just kick off with, obviously this is a very, very unique time in a lot of ways. And I was hoping that you could just kind of speak to, for folks that are looking for a job right now in this extremely unique moment, what is your kind of top recommendations? If you were looking for a job right now, what are you thinking about today?
Yep. No, great question, Jacob. And I'm also, if I'm ever looking off screen, I'm also just looking at the chats, and just want to echo what Jacob said is first, like, thank you for having me here today. And then second is, yeah, feel free to ask anything. The more direct questions, the better. So literally happy to answer anything. To take it just a few steps back and I guess explain what I do just like operationally on a day-to-day perspective. So myself and a team of people, we run a recruiting marketplace called Purpose.jobs, where we're connecting awesome people like the individuals that are on this call, with awesome startup and technology companies. We primarily focus specifically here in Southeast Michigan. What that means is, Detroit, Ann Arbor suburbs, and we're actually soon, starting in June, going to be launching in a few other cities in the Midwest. And so that's what we do. We essentially run a dating app, but in the career world. So we see a lot of different things. Companies pay us a subscription to get access to our talent. It's completely free for candidates to get access. And so we see a lot of different data points. And again, we're not like the typical headhunter where it's like, hey, get a job and we get paid. No, we're just here to help build the community and match people. And so that's what we do. To answer your question,
Yeah,
Jacob,
wait, before you do that, Ryan, I apologize sincerely. So I forgot to introduce you. So
no.
Ryan just introduced himself very well, but he's also a very humble man. So I just want to add to that quickly before you dive in. So Ryan is the CEO and co-founder of purpose.jobs, which he just explained is an awesome platform that connects job seekers and local companies, predominantly tech companies, as he mentioned. I've had the pleasure of both working with Ryan at a previous startup called Ambassador in Royal Oak, and kind of seeing him firsthand how he approached building that team. I've had a chance to really watch him, from up close in terms of hiring and job searching, and can say very, very confidently that this guy knows what he's talking about as it relates to job search. With that said, I apologize about that, Ryan. So now diving in, Ryan, for the job seekers in the room, what are you thinking about right now?
Yeah, so I think right now is an interesting time, and unusual is one way to explain this time, or it's just not normal. So I think we all have to take a step back and just be like, what we're living through right now is not normal at all. And so what can you be doing as like a job seeker right now? And I see some people are, posting in the chat that they're looking for a job. I think there's a few things. So I want to answer this question in two parts. One, as in research, and then two, as in like reaching out to people and how to structure that conversation. So one specifically like on the research side, I think there's a few things how you can research companies. So one is, I think the obvious statement is, hey, check out Glassdoor, see what different employees are saying about a company, right? That's the obvious one. But in order for a company to survive, I know this is a very simple statement, they have to have customers. And so what I also recommend for people is not just to look what the employees are saying about the company, look what the customers are also saying about the company. And so at the end of the day, for a company to survive in the long run, they have to have really, really happy customers that are willing to pay them. So I think customers are also important. The other part of the research that I would do is look at the leaders at the company, or really just look at anyone at the company and look at different track record. Are you joining a company potentially that has a leaders of track records that has done this before? Is it their first time rodeo? Again, there's not a right and a wrong answer, but I think it's good to know what you're getting into. Hey, am I going to help a first-time founder build something from the ground up, or am I joining a company, a veteran company that's done this time and time and again? And so I think there's a lot of ways to do different research for companies. So I think that's one, and happy to dive into that more. Then bucket two is how to structure those conversations. I would be the first one to tell you, look, when we run our recruiting, marketplace right now, supply, which is candidates, has gone up about 80%, and the amount of job postings has gone down about 44%, which we've seen. So there are definitely less jobs on the market. So that's just a reality we have to face. However, I think it's really interesting. Everyone's at home. Everyone's doing puzzles. Everyone's, going out. There's literally a lockdown happening in Michigan. So I think it's a really good opportunity to reach out to someone maybe that you admire or where you want to get a job, and not say, hey, I need a job right now. Maybe just reach out to them and ask for advice. So you're a marketing individual and you want to eventually apply for a content role. Maybe you reach out to the CMO there and say, hey, how did you become the CMO at this company? Can you walk me through your journey? And so again, dating and career searching. I hate to say that there's a lot of parallels, but there's a ton. I would say take it slow, take a step back, and people love talking about themselves. So reach out to someone on LinkedIn and say, hey, I would love to learn more about you. I see that as a really good approach, opposed to being like, hey, I would like to work for you. Again, similar kind of goals at the end of the day, but it's just a different and softer approach.
Got it. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're advocating for a research-driven opportunity where folks are researching companies, finding out not only what employees are saying, but also what customers are saying, looking at the track records of the leaders, et cetera, and also from a networking standpoint, tapping the human desire to speak about oneself, and requesting, looking to tap folks' brains. And we can get into that. I want to dive into that a little bit deeper in just a moment. But you just hit on something that is something I'm thinking about a lot, and something I'd love you to elaborate on. So you mentioned that on your platform, I imagine this is true elsewhere, there's a surge of folks looking for jobs, while the actual number of jobs available has remained stagnant or potentially decreased. How would you recommend standing out in this environment? How do you approach this in a way that's not, you're not just one of a million other people that are trying to do the same thing?
Yep. So how do you stand out? I think there's a couple ways. So I think initially, let's go back to this marketing example again. So I think one way that's very actionable is you could reach out to the leader of whatever position you're applying for. So if you're a marketing individual, or let's say you're a software engineer, I see in the chat, there's a lot of engineers here. If you're an engineer, reach out to the CTO, reach out to the director of talent, asking them just for general advice, general, like, hey, how did you get there? So I think that's one. And then I think during that conversation, you could ask them about different interesting projects that they're working on. And what we see nowadays, and I see some people, graduated from Tech Elevator or other boot camps, the beautiful kind of world that we're living in is, I don't think education, whether you went to Tech Elevator, whether you went to Oakland, Michigan State, or Harvard, I don't think that's really important anymore. I think what companies really care about are two things. One, are you a really good human? And one, can you get shit done and help move the business forward? And so if you're able to show that somehow, and stand out, as in do maybe a small engineering project and present it to the company, maybe you're going back to that marketing position and you see them blogging a lot about, whatever it is, maybe write an example post, take an hour or two and write a post and say, hey, here's 5 ideas that I think maybe that you guys could approach, or here's an example blog post that I would love for you to publish. So I think a way that you can stand out is, one, asking for advice and getting people to talk about themselves, and two, project-based work during the interview process, I think is a really awesome opportunity too.
Cool. And yeah, specific to the technical folks in the room, if you're looking for a software job, this is something that comes up time and time again, and something that's particularly relevant to this moment. Start working on projects. So whether that's open source is one that you hear about a lot, but there's lots of different opportunities, and we can follow up with some examples of that because I don't have any offhand. I apologize, but lots of really exciting opportunities to contribute to ongoing projects in this moment, in a way that when you are ultimately interviewing or coming across an opportunity you're excited about and reaching out in the way Ryan's mentioning, you have an opportunity to point folks to, say, your GitHub or something like that to demonstrate the application of your skills. I want to also echo something that Ryan mentioned. I'm coming at this from a non-technical perspective, and I can say that strategy has worked really well for me in my career. One really notable example would be my first a job that I had a number of years ago, doing business development at a local startup that was called Up2. I actually submitted, when I got the interview, I came to the interview with a 2-page description of what I would do if I were to get the job. That was a strategy that worked so well that it was also something that I did for when I approached this job at Collider. So when I first met the team that was interested in rolling out this project, I actually literally wrote out about a 1.5-page, here's kind of 4 different areas, here's how I would approach this. And as someone who hires people, that's something that would really help somebody stand out in my mind as well. If somebody shows that they not only are demonstrating their work, but also showing how bad they want the job. both are, you're able to kind of kill both those birds with one stone. Pardon the violence of that expression. Great. So those are awesome tips, Ryan. The other side of kind of candidates outpacing jobs, and this is one that's a lot harder to answer, so I apologize. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but any indication of when companies will start ramping up hiring?
That's a good question. So I definitely don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know. I would say two things. We are definitely heading in the right direction. So I say there's about a 44% decrease in job postings that we see. About maybe, I want to say 6 weeks ago, it was probably a 77% drop. And so we're actually going in the right direction. We are still ideally in the world not in a good place, and I recognize that. But again, in our little world that we live in, we've seen from a 70% drop in job postings to now a 44%. Again, still way lower than we ever expected to see this year, but numbers are trending in the right direction. I do think when the world and how we're building our projections is thinking about January 1st. And what I mean by January 1st is I think things will get back to, I don't know what this means, normal, starting after the New Year's, but I think there's a lot of other factors that will either speed things up or slow things down. But that doesn't mean between now and then you can't find a job. We do see people still getting hired right now. It definitely is at a slower clip, but my guess would be January 1st, but I would say take that with a grain of salt as a quick as a quick disclaimer.
And to add on to that, so you mentioned some folks are finding jobs. In your personal experience, what types of companies are hiring now, and or what types of roles are you seeing people finding success with today, or kind of, and what do you expect kind of to ramp up next, I suppose?
Yeah, so let's talk about hiring in a second. I think there's even one more step before hiring. And what we see all the time is companies right now, they're saying, hey, I'm not hiring right now, but I would love to build my candidate pipeline. And what does that mean? They mean when they turn the faucet on, maybe January 1st, they want to have candidates ready to go that they can just start giving out job offers. So I would say probably, and this is actually really good news, very few companies, I would say 2% of companies are just like, we don't want to talk to anyone. We're done. Let's close the door to everyone. I think 98% of companies are either building their pipeline or giving out job offers right now. Again, the giving out job offers, I do think is a lot smaller right now and a lot smaller than normal. But I think, again, before we just jump into like when is jobs going to turn on, I think right now as a candidate, it's a really great time to talk to companies because companies are really building their pipeline and want to be talking to people. It's really across all verticals. I don't have like an insight in saying, hey, engineering or marketing is hotter one than other right now. But I do think from a pipeline perspective, there's a ton of candidates that want to be, a ton of employers that want to be building that pipeline.
And I can say from our perspective, Altimetrik as a company went from looking to hire 100 plus engineers nationally pre-lockdown to being completely unclear on kind of how many people we're going to be hiring in the immediate short term. So we're experiencing this very directly. And to echo Ryan's point, the messaging that we're receiving from our team, our talent acquisition team, is we want to be actively building the pipeline. We want to be continuing to talk with viable potential candidates so that we're ready to run as soon as we have more stability around what hiring looks like again. So I think that's really crucial insight that I'm not sure if everyone's kind of aware of the way that the mindset works within these organizations. Uncertainty adds a lot of complications on the hiring side, but companies are always looking to be connecting with and talking to viable job seekers and such. So use that to your advantage. I mean, now coming back to what Ryan was saying, now is the time to be reaching out and looking to figure out ways to stand out and shift up that funnel in that sense. Fantastic. And so speaking of which, you mentioned kind of this notion of using the time productively, whether that's to be, researching, connecting with folks, networking, building out your portfolio, et cetera. I want to make a caveat here that's, I think in this moment you're hearing, social media is, can be a dangerous place in the sense that you're looking at this kind of constant stream of people appearing to be kind of hyper productive and learning how to bake bread while also managing kids and learning how to code and all this type of stuff. And I think it's really important that in the context of this conversation, while we talk about ways to be productive, I can speak from personal experience that you can't be too hard on yourself in this moment. At the same time, everybody's dealing with different challenges right now, and your challenges are legitimate and are completely warranted and legitimate. And so I want to be able to focus on kind of how to be productive, but through that lens of being productive within the realm of reasonability, as defined by yourself. So I just want to put that out there. But Ryan, turning that into a question, kind of what are, if you could just elaborate on what are some ways that you see folks being productive as it relates to job seeking in this moment?
So ways to be productive. So I would say a couple things. We kind of talked about the research stage before, reaching out to people, getting advice. The other thing that I would layer on top of and just kind of echoing what you said, Jacob, right now it's a really even playing field. Everyone's at home. And so it's a really great time to reach out to people just because there's less distractions. And typically, yes, you do have distractions of the kids and, things like that, but people aren't going golfing or on vacation and stuff like that. Just most people are home. And I think you can really get to know someone and a company really well during this time. And again, at the end of the day, what I always like to say is a company is really just a collection of people. So like you're just getting to know people. And so a few important things that I'm always thinking about when I want to get to know someone or a company or an individual better is really thinking about questions. And what are like good questions to ask a company to get to know them. And Jacob and I actually talked about this last night. There's two particular questions that I think are super interesting to ask a company or a hiring leader. And one is diversity. And typically when you hear the diversity word, we're thinking about race, gender, sexuality, that type of diversity. But I also think there's another type of diversity, and I mean diversity in thought. And you want to know that you're joining a team that has a diversity in thought. So, hey, the skill set that I have, how many other people in the company has the same skill set? Are you a type of company that is just, getting leaders from top up here, and then you're just kind of barking down orders and, you are just kind of doing whatever you're told? Or are they really looking for diversity in thought as they want us to be an innovative company where ideas can come from anywhere? So I think, yes, looking to make sure the company is diverse from a race, sexuality, all that stuff is important. But I also think diversity of thought, asking questions around that is super important. That's one bucket. The next question that I always like to ask are about values and is about culture. And so I think when you think about culture, people sometimes associate culture towards a ping pong table or a Slurpee machine. I can assure you those aren't. That isn't culture and that is not values. And so I think it's really important, one, to understand what a company's culture is and what their values are, and then to push them the next stage farther is and ask them to see these values in action. So if they say they're flexible, great, let's see these values in action and understand how they're flexible. And I'm just using this as an example. Are they okay with remote working? What is their vacation policy? How do they take, are they accepting to feedback? Things like that. So I think values in action are super important, and it's just going a layer deeper than saying, hey, what are your values at your company? I think that's one layer. And then asking about values in action on a day-to-day perspective, as I think is the next layer that you can get deeper with a specific company. So I know I just threw a lot on there, but I'll pause right there.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point about you mentioned the less distractions. And in a recent talk, Ryan, I heard you mention, you hit that from a different angle, which was that, asking somebody to coffee or whatever the case may be, like they have to travel and park and there's like all the extra hassle of all that. So there's, folks potentially, depending on who it is, might actually have increased scope of being able to connect and chat. The one piece I wanted to add to that, Ryan, is just from like general networking advice. When I'm thinking about networking, and it's pretty much what I do for a living, I'm thinking of always in terms of how I can add value. I'm always thinking value first. And I think a lot of folks get tripped up here where, especially if you're entering the workforce, or if you're like talking with somebody in the context of looking for a job, you might be thinking to yourself, like, I don't have any value to exchange in this interaction. I'm just asking for something. But that I really firmly don't believe that's the case. I think Ryan's insight that he shared earlier, this idea of, by giving someone the opportunity to share insight and to kind of brag about themselves and their accomplishments and how they got to where they are, is a way that you're adding value to that person. That might seem counterintuitive initially, but it really is. And it's and not in an artificial way. Like, you really, the point though is to be framing the conversation sincerely through that lens. You're not just there to gimme. And if you are approaching it through that kind of gimme lens, it's really quick and easy to sniff that out as an employer, or just as somebody who's trying to help somebody. What I'm much more interested in when somebody reaches out to me and says, "Hey, can I tap your brain?" is literally that. Is are they sincerely looking to learn and understand my story? And that's a type of value that I'm happy to provide, as opposed to the other example that I gave. Does that make sense? Did I explain that clearly?
Totally.
Cool. Fantastic. Could you speak in more detail, Ryan? You've alluded to a few different tools. I know you mentioned Glassdoor before from a researching company standpoint. Talking about LinkedIn, GitHub, personal website. I think it's contextual based on the type of job you're looking for, but could you kind of speak to that quickly? Like, what types of online properties and presence are kind of key for job evaluators today?
Yeah, so I think, the obvious ones which you just mentioned are like LinkedIn and Glassdoor. But going back to the earlier, thought that we were having about research, specific sites are, one is like Capterra, another one is like G2, where they just review customers, review them. I'm trying to think, Crunchbase is another great one. And the reason I specifically mentioned Crunchbase is, for a company to survive, they have to have cash. And so in Crunchbase, you can, do a little bit of research. Did this company, and is this company growing, 1, from raising money, 2, from their customers, 3, from loans? I mean, there's a lot of ways to finance a business. And so Crunchbase is another example. So I would say those are a few tools: Crunchbase, G2, Capterra, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, to really get like a holistic view of a company. Cool.
And so before we move on to the next question, I want to touch on Christopher's question here, because it's contextually relevant. He mentioned, what about unfinished projects? So when we talk about this idea of, sharing projects that you're working on, what constitutes a project that's worth sharing, I suppose?
Yeah, great. Yeah, great question, Christopher. And what I would say is probably way more about software engineering than I do. But my first immediate thought when Jacob was reading that question was, software is actually never finished. And what I mean by that is, like, software is a project that you initially launch, and then you want to add this feature and this feature and this feature, and then there's a bug, and then you want to add a new feature and different enhancements. So I think once you have one thing live, it's okay to show the person and being like, just transparent. Hey, here is my project. Here are different features or enhancements that I'm thinking about, and talk about that product roadmap with that specific company. And I think they'll really appreciate that, because I guess, yes, they want to know where you've been, but I think they're probably more interested of where you're going, specifically with you as an individual and specifically that project. And so I think if you're able to articulate that roadmap, what the individual really cares about is really your thought process. And so I would actually show something that you might be slightly embarrassed about. And I think that's okay. Just kind of articulate that as in this is just the beginning, and here's the roadmap that I want to take you on in the journey.
And I think that that's also on you to frame kind of how you're thinking about that. So I think something that can come out of that might be, for example, folks are looking for folks that are highly autonomous learners, and you hear folks that are like dynamic or fast learners or whatever the case may be. So kind of showing that trajectory of how much you've learned or changed over time. Often I think companies are more interested to see that change and your demonstration of your kind of tenacity, hard work, ability to learn and grow, as much as companies are interested in kind of seeing that final product. It's the classic, math teacher telling you to show your work, even if you don't know the whole answer. Christopher, did that answer your question there? While we're waiting on that answer, so here's another one. So Michael Robinson here chimed in asking about remote jobs, which I wanted to chat about as well. I'm going to pose this more high level to start. Obviously, with the uncertainty about physical spaces and folks getting together, I think it's safe to assume a lot more companies are forced to work remotely in this moment. How do you expect that to kind of net out as companies do return to work? Do you expect there to kind of be this lingering kind of jump in surge in remote job opportunities as companies adjust to the new reality?
For sure. And so I would say, look, I'm gonna be the first one to say there's a lot of unfortunate things that are happening right now, but I do think there are, and I'm an optimist in the world, I do think there are a few silver linings. One of the things is I do think companies are going to be way more open to remote team members, frankly, because companies might have just have never wanted to test it out or try it out. And now all these companies are just being forced to make their whole entire company remote. And so people are learning by this constraint right now that like, hey, remote really works. And so to answer the question directly is I think there's going to be a ton more opportunities in remote jobs that are available. I mean, you look at companies like Twitter that just announced recently, I mean, yes, they still have offices in San Francisco, but they just said, hey, if you're remote, you can stay remote forever. And so I think that's like pretty interesting and them moving that needle forward. I also recently talked to a few companies in San Francisco. Maybe that was two days ago. A company called Twilio. They're in the SMS space in messaging. And what they actually said I found was really interesting is though, remote or in office, it's not so black and white. They'll continue to have their office in San Francisco, but they want to start hiring more remote team members. And here's where the interesting part comes in. They said they want to hire more remote team members, not in San Francisco or New York, specifically in the middle of the country. And I said, why do you want to do that? And they're like, there's a lower cost of living where I could hire someone that's going to be, $200,000 engineer in San Francisco. I can find a great engineer in the Midwest that makes not only just like good, maybe he's even a better engineer, and also pay them less. And so paying them less is not like the driving force, but I think in the Midwest there's a huge opportunity because the cost of living is lower to really find great people here. And so I guess as a quick preview, we were actually just focusing on like Detroit, the Midwest, and a few other cities in the Midwest. We're actually launching a remote vertical in the next, it's probably going to be 3 weeks or a month to try to, jump on this bandwagon right now, because I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of companies. And long story short is there's going to be a ton more opportunities. And that's what I would place my bet on.
And just to be clear about the pay them less, I think I'm curious. Like, do companies think about like the ratio of cost of living and salary? Is that how companies that are based in somewhere like a San Francisco or New York that are looking elsewhere in the country are they thinking about that as a ratio? Just out of curiosity.
I do, and I want to elaborate the cost them less comment. There's a few things. So salary is obviously one that comes to mind. Oh, if someone's getting paid 200, I can pay them 150, and I'm just making up numbers. But that's only one factor into a team member. The other factor that most companies don't think about and are starting to think about more is retention. And so retention, it is hard to have team members that are here for 6 months and then leave, here for 6 months and leave. It gets really costly to them. And so the thing that's a challenge in San Francisco and in New York is there's so many companies out there, and it's so competitive. Great people and great engineers are switching jobs all of the time. And so companies are trying to get out of that, let's call it hamster wheel, and find people that have a good work ethic, care about work-life balance. I can pay them fairly and stuff like that. So the cost of an individual's salary is really just one component to it.
That makes sense. And then to Michael's question more specifically, have you seen, as it relates to, I did actually want to add to that quickly, is that Altimetrik as a company, again, just kind of speaking from the perspective of a 2,500 employee global software services firm, putting on that hat, literally, we had almost not considered remote employment at all for our team previously, by nature of working with, we're kind of at the whim of our clients that we work with. Most of our work is client driven. And so a lot of these companies you're talking about, a lot of companies you've heard of, Ford, MasterCard, PayPal, Ancestry.com, big companies that we work with, those companies weren't even considering remote employees as it related to the folks that we had working with them. And now that's starting to change completely, where now our team is completely kind of rethinking that whole aspect of things, with the fully anticipating that remote employees are going to be a substantial part of that mix moving forward. So I can speak anecdotally from our experience. We've seen that across our client base. Absolutely. And now to ask Michael's question more explicitly, how about with regards to the actual hiring process? Have you seen, so given that there's more remote jobs, given that now we're interviewing remotely, kind of how does that affect the style and speed of the hiring process?
Yep, style and speed. So let's put those into two different buckets. I think the style, for sure, it definitely changes things up. People are doing stuff like we're doing today, over Zoom and onboarding people. So the style, I think, definitely is changing, but I do think it's also for the positive. And what I mean by that is it makes the playing field even, a little bit more even compared to taking a individual, walking them through the fancy office and stuff like that. Here over Zoom, everything is a little bit more equal, and you can just have a really good, authentic conversation with someone. So yes, the style has changed. The speed, I don't think so. I think the speed more has to do with just the world that we're living in. And so yes, the speed has slowed down just because there's less jobs available, but I don't think remote hiring, I actually think in some worlds it could even go faster, just because when you're traveling, you have to fly back and forth. This allows you can fire up a Zoom conversation in 30 seconds. And so I think from a from a style standpoint, yes, it is different. But from a speed standpoint, I think the only reason we're seeing it slower right now is just because there's less jobs available. But I think in some specifics, this actually will speed up the hiring process, come later this year.
How about specifically as it relates to the interview process? Kind of what, so a lot of companies kind of already maybe had a piece of their interview process done remotely, but then I assume many companies kind of prioritize in-person conversations when the hiring. So how are you seeing this directly impact the interview piece of the process?
Great question. The interview process, I would love to say I've seen a lot change, but I really haven't. Initially, what we typically see is there's that initial phone call, making sure that expectations are aligned, one from the candidate perspective, from the company, is this a right, good fit? Typically, the next step would be a project. We see that as typically step number 2. And then step 3, sometimes step 2 and 3 get flipped around a little bit, is typically that in-person conversation. And so basically, instead of the in-person conversation, we are just seeing people using Zoom and bringing multiple team members on and doing some type of video conversation, utilizing Zoom breakout rooms and stuff like that. So specifically the interview process, it really hasn't changed that much, besides just flipping the in-person meetings to Zoom conversations or Zoom breakout rooms. And so I think technology is actually going to make everyone's life really easier, and that's a really good thing that's happening.
And Ryan, you made a good point when we were chatting yesterday. So I like to think as a professional people person, but also for folks that, engineers or folks that maybe aren't, where people interaction is not the primary part of your job, but still an important part. Whether it's an opportunity to stand out with your personality, or whether it's really what the focus of your job is, I really view the in-person interview as a big piece of that, my kind of opportunity to let my personality shine. So to that degree, obviously you can be kind of setting up those conversations, but you made a good point yesterday, Ryan, where you were talking about kind of letting your personality shine through LinkedIn or other like social media or online properties. Could you speak to that in more detail?
Yeah. So one of the things, exactly, you don't have that opportunity to, give that individual like a handshake or something like that. And everyone, on this conversation that we're having yesterday was talking about, hey, here's all like the great ways to like optimize your LinkedIn. I think there's 1.5 million tricks to show your professional experience, but I think also use LinkedIn or whatever tool it is, your resume, so on and so forth, to show your personality. So on LinkedIn, show, in some places in like the summary section, for example, that you're an avid traveler, show that you love volunteering. I don't really know what you're specifically into, but like there's a lot of great opportunities to really just showcase who you are. I've also seen some applicants recently start doing videos, which I find is like super interesting. I know not everyone's comfortable with that, but I think like video is another great opportunity to show your personality. And so use the resume, LinkedIn, email, every single touch point that you have with an individual over this virtual world is an opportunity to really brand yourself.
That's super interesting. And I do want to just take that back to, I think for technical professionals, I think that often gets overlooked. If your day-to-day job isn't going to be as kind of people-centric, but from an employer perspective, it's certainly a major consideration. So oftentimes with coding interviews, presenting your code to the team is often a major piece of the interview process. That's not just a formality, that's also to give the evaluator an opportunity to see to evaluate your communication skills and your ability to explain what you're working on, which still is a really important part of any job, even if you're primarily talking directly to a computer. So just to put that out there. So we've got a question here. Shupendu, I hope I'm pronouncing your name somewhat correctly. Not fully understanding necessarily the nature of the question. So good time to switch domains. Let's talk about switching from, so do you mean in terms of switching from something more hyper-specific to something more general? Am I understanding that correctly?
So my question is like specifically since this remote working is like coming into a mainstream working style, right? So like Detroit is mainly known for its automotive related stuff, or since we have the startup incubation here as well, but it's mostly known for the automotive related like normal jobs, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody like me from the Detroit want to aspire to work for a tech company like from the West Coast, so I think like is this a good time to do something like that? Actually, yeah. The question is specifically like I want to go to I want to work for the tech companies, but the ecosystem in like Detroit, as far as I know, I may be wrong, but as far as I know, like it's not that much evolved as I think as compared to the normal automotive related industries and products in general. So yeah.
And Ryan, I think you touched on that with the Twilio example, but could you speak kind of more generally about seeking jobs
For sure. And
Not
I
just
think
companies locally.
it's a great question. What I would do is a couple of things. So one, I would look, let's say you want to move to the West Coast, maybe that's the answer, or, you know, you have some companies that you're eyeing. I would put maybe a bucket list of, let's say, 5 companies that you want to eventually work at or go after. The next step that I would do from there is really do a lot of research, which we talked about before. But I think a really great thing to do is look at their technology stack. So maybe this company is super heavy into Salesforce. Maybe they're super heavy into HubSpot from a marketing automation standpoint. Maybe they're super into you know, GitHub or you know different Microsoft technologies. I would understand, so bucket list, understand what type of technologies they do. In most of these companies, on an individual level, Salesforce, HubSpot, Microsoft, all have certifications themselves. And so I know companies really appreciate that. So right, if you're a marketing person, having a HubSpot certification is super helpful. If you want to work at a company that uses Salesforce and they're looking for Salesforce architects, specifically on the engineering side, there's definitely Salesforce architects, you know, solutions. You know, if you want to work for Microsoft and if you want to work for a company that's, you know, invested into Microsoft technologies and using a lot of .NET, there's definitely, you know, .NET certifications out there. And so most of these companies, and I actually, this is getting off on a tangent, I actually think that's kind of probably be the future of education too, is these, you know, companies generating their own content and developing their own certifications for people to get educated, and then really create that flywheel between educated company and employment.
Ryan, you froze for just the very end of that for me. So I don't know about anybody else, but just the very end of that, sorry.
Yeah, so all I was mentioning is that, you know, I really do think that's going to be a big part of the future of education, is having company-led, you know, education initiatives. And so, you know, like Salesforce, HubSpot are doing, they have these certifications. And so they are training people and then hiring people. So they're kind of eating their own dog food. So long story short is I think right now is a great opportunity to research the companies, learn what technologies that they're using, and get certifications in those specific companies. And you can do that from your couch.
Fantastic. So guys, we're at 6:20 here, Eastern time. So we're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes. So I encourage anybody, if you have any other questions, to go ahead and add them to the chat here. I guess what we can do, I have a few other questions, Ryan, but I think we've really covered the high level thing. So I guess if we could, it might be more helpful to just kind of start to summarize some of this information. One thing I wanted to mention is often when folks are looking to kind of break into the technology sphere, a common piece of advice that we give to folks is kind of a 3-pronged approach. So on the one hand, it's like, we typically say, come start hanging out at the Collider, obviously, because that's what we structure our programming around. But it's the 3-pronged strategy is around starting to build your professional network or expanding your professional network, really starting to build a portfolio. So whether that is a GitHub portfolio or whether that's a portfolio of blog posts, if you're a writer, whatever your portfolio looks like, starting to build that content, and continuing your education. So really having a clear pathway that demonstrates that you have this capacity and desire to be continuing to learn. Those really are our top kind of the way that we frame this conversation, that I think, Ryan, you eloquently touched on each of those pieces.
Yeah, thanks. And I think just want to piggyback on one thing you said is some like additional resources. So yes, I think come hanging out at the Collider is a great place. There's also, you know, Bamboo, there's also WeWork and stuff like that are doing great things right now virtually. I also specifically see our good friend Allison from Cahoots is on this call. And so, you know, that's another great place to, you know, and resource in Ann Arbor. So places like Cahoots, WeWork, Collider, you know, now you can't physically hang out there, but I think they're doing a lot of like amazing virtual stuff that it's great to see kind of the ecosystem and portfolio of companies that they're working with.
And I'll post it in here in just a second, but so in terms of like ways to find that information, the Detroit ecosystem, just from my experience and talking with people trying to kind of break into the tech and entrepreneurial ecosystem, it can sometimes feel a little bit siloed in terms of the information, and it can be kind of hard to break into. Once you know where to look, it's actually quite welcoming and easy. So some resources there, and Ryan helped me out here, but I'm thinking about there's startupdetroit.co that breaks down some different resources. There's a number, Detroit is really strong for those that aren't aware with different Slack workspaces. So if you're not familiar with Slack, it's a chat tool. It's free to use and download. And there's a number of different workspaces they're called. So there's a Startup Detroit Slack workspace and a number of others that we can share in a follow-up that depending on what you're specifically looking for, each of those typically has a jobs channel and an opportunity to let folks know that you're searching and find out about opportunities. So that's definitely something I strongly recommend. We have our own Slack channel as well, the Collider Detroit Slack channel that we can share a link to. But more generally, we also have a Detroit Tech Events calendar that we curate that we'll follow up with a link to. That's really what we do is literally as Ryan Robinson and I come across cool tech-related events in the city, we compile, or in southeastern Michigan, we compile it into a centralized calendar to try to make that easier for folks to navigate. So we pull that information typically from Facebook events, from Meetup, from Eventbrite. So I encourage you to check out each of those platforms and just kind of explore and follow channels that are particularly relevant to you as well. Anything I'm missing there, Ryan, in terms of where to find these types of online events and things?
No, I think all the ones that you mentioned are super solid. The other shout out that I would give, because Allison's inspiring me about this, all this Ann Arbor stuff, is A2 New Tech Meetup. And so that's another great one. I think Ann Arbor has a beautiful ecosystem that's going on right now. And so I literally just on the side was Googling just Ann Arbor startups, and A2 New Tech, they have their own website. They have their own, when it's in person, they have a meetup that's going on. But I also think, again, slightly off topic, but based on what happened recently with Duo and their acquisition, there is a ton. I can think of 5 or 6 security companies that have recently spun off just based off of that like Duo exit. So there's a ton of activity, yes, happening in Detroit, but I'm a massive fan of also Ann Arbor. So a ton of things happening there too.
Absolutely, and we do include Ann Arbor in the tech calendar that I mentioned that I just shared a link to as well. Absolutely part of the Southeast Michigan family here. Fantastic. So anything else, just in terms of anything else we might not have covered, Ryan, that's burning for you?
Ooh, burning. No, I think we talked about a lot of good things. And so I think I'll tell you one thing, like I'm really not that good at, is patience. Like I always love just to like make shit happen like immediately. And so again, I think recognizing again that we're not living in a normal time right now, I think is a good first step. And it's just about being patient, playing the slow game with companies, having the conversations, getting to know them, doing that research, asking good questions, kind of all the things that we talked about today. And all of those things, again, I really believe, and again, we literally see thousands of job applicants every single month, but the ones that stick out are the ones that do the extra effort. And extra effort doesn't mean you need to write like a thesis. It really just means reaching out to people, suggesting new ideas, showing that you did good research. And I would say the thing that always impresses me the most is asking good questions. And so asking questions about diversity of thought, asking questions about values and culture, values and action. And so stuff like that. I think you'll really impress someone, not just by talking, but by asking really good questions. And so, no, I think this was great today. And Jacob, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And whenever you're in an interview setting, there's almost always a time at the end where the person asks if you have any questions. That is part of your interview. So always, always, always come to an interview with good questions prepared. Should you not think of good questions as the person's interviewing you? Because that is not good look if somebody finishes the interview and they say, yeah, do you have any questions? And you're like, no, I'm okay. It's just a missed opportunity to kind of further demonstrate your personality, your curiosity, and the research that you've done into the company and who you're talking to. So that is fantastic. The last thing that I want to just to encourage everybody to do is to connect with us. To also, we shared before, but Ryan's platform is purpose.jobs, which I'm going to have to share the full link for that to render properly. But I encourage everybody to check out and sign up for purpose.jobs. Just an awesome platform. They help look for the jobs for you. So it's just a really amazing way to kind of passively enhance your job search process. So I really strongly encourage that. Also connect with us. We have a weekly e-newsletter that goes out that highlights not only job opportunities, but also relevant tech news and other updates locally that is I'd like to believe very helpful. Ryan Robinson and I work really hard on making sure that that's robust and providing different types of information. We're very active with Meetup, posting upcoming events. We're hosting not only stuff like this aimed at helping you find jobs, but also helping you grow and connect, as I mentioned. So lots of different types of programming, whether that be meetups or hackathons or different types of groups and things. So definitely check that out. And the last thing I'll say is that we will be sending out a follow-up to this conversation to everybody that signed up. So please do follow up with us with your email address if you did not register for this event, because otherwise you won't receive that. But I do want to note that we just recently launched a blog on our website where we are now going to be posting effectively a summary of each event that includes the video and some kind of key takeaways, and hopefully photos once we get back to having in-person events as well. So you'll be able to find a recap of this conversation along with a video on both in the follow-up email and on our blog after the fact. So with that, if you have any additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm going to add my email address in here as well.
Yep, and
I know we just rifled a bunch of information, but please don't hesitate to reach out with questions.
Yep, and I just did the same too. My email's in there, LinkedIn's in there. Feel free to reach out literally at any time. I'm happy to be supportive, and I know I did a lot of talking today, but yeah, happy also just to listen. I love listening, so feel free to reach out.
I really appreciate everybody joining us here today, and excited to connect soon.
Thanks, guys.